Lisa, I need that report on my desk first thing tomorrow morning. No excuses. It was Sunday night, exactly 10:04 p.m., and my phone kept buzzing with the message notification, another text from my manager, Rachel. Of course, it was her only 3 weeks into this new job, and the facade was already starting to crack. After both my husband and I were laid off last year, I was desperate for a fresh start. Landing the position at Errant Tech felt like a step backward, but bills don't pay themselves, and Brian, the hiring manager, had seemed genuinely kind and sincere. At first, the team welcomed me warmly. It felt like the beginning of something new and hopeful. Then Rachel appeared. Officially, my role was to act as a project liaison between Brian's strategy team and Rachel's product division. Unofficially, I quickly realized I was Rachel's personal target. That became painfully obvious very fast. She'd send emails at 9 p.m., call me at 7 a.m. on weekends, demand I cancel time off, skip lunch breaks, and rewrite my documents to fit her tone. But the worst wasn't the workload. It was the sharpness of her words, the way she constantly stabbed at me. "You really should dress for your body type. You're surprisingly sharp for someone without a technical degree. Brian must have hired you out of pity." I tried to stand my ground, calmly, professionally, but that only seemed to fuel her fire. Every bit of assertiveness I showed was met with a fresh wave of passive-aggressive comments or outright insults. I stuck it out because I had no choice. Our mortgage didn't care about my pride, and we still hadn't recovered from the medical bills after my father-in-law died. But something inside me snapped one Friday afternoon. I had just finished a team meeting and scheduled a follow-up without including one of Rachel's junior analysts. I didn't even know the guy existed. But that didn't stop Rachel from storming into the open office, her voice cutting through the floor so half the staff could hear. "Do you even know what you're doing, Lisa? Who let you run meetings unsupervised? Honestly, you're a complete mess." I froze. Everyone was staring. My hands trembled. I walked straight into Brian's office and shut the door behind me. I didn't even sit down. "I can't do this anymore." He looked at me silently for a long moment, then sighed. "You're not the first to say that," he admitted. "She's lost 4 people in 6 months. I hoped this time would be different." He didn't hesitate by that evening. I was moved officially onto his team. Out from under Rachel's thumb, I finally felt like I could breathe again for a moment. But the reprieve was short-lived. The next Monday, I got an email from Rachel titled simply "Urgent." Inside were bullet points, tasks, and demands. As if nothing had changed, I ignored it that Wednesday. She appeared at my desk. "So you're ignoring me now?" she hissed, loud enough for my new team to overhear. "Is that how you play this? Act like the victim, then pretend you're too good for the job?" Before I could answer, Brian showed up behind her. "Rachel, that's enough." She went pale, but the damage was done. And still, it didn't end. She kept sending emails, circling like a shark, unaware that the meal was over. I tried to focus on my work, but the tension lingered. 2 weeks later, I made up my mind. I opened a blank document and typed my resignation. Simple and straightforward. But I didn't stop there. I attached a second file, a detailed 3-page list of every inappropriate comment, every demand after hours, every documented case of verbal abuse I could remember, dated, sourced, crystal clear. Then I hit send not just to Brian, but to HR, leadership, and Rachel's director responses flooded in, some shocked, some supportive, some silent. Rachel stayed, I left. But what she didn't realize was I wasn't really gone. Not yet. I had already set something in motion, something she wouldn't see coming until it was far, far too late. The calm. Before the storm. The morning after I quit, I sat at the kitchen table wrapped in my robe, staring at a half-full cup of coffee. My inbox was silent. No late-night tasks, no urgent subjects, no Rachel. It felt unreal, but peace has a funny way of twisting into panic when the paycheck stops. We had just enough savings to cover maybe 2 months of bills if we cut out all extras. No dinners out, no impulse buys, zero room for surprises. My husband had just started a new job, but his salary barely covered half our monthly expenses. Money was tight, uncomfortably tight. Emotionally, I was exhausted. Leaving felt like taking my first breath after almost drowning, but freedom didn't pay the mortgage. Over the next 2 weeks, I applied to every relevant job I could find. 5 applications a day, sometimes 10. I tailored every resume and rewrote each cover letter. Still, nothing one afternoon. As I scrolled through job boards, a LinkedIn notification popped up. David Montgomery has joined Errant Tech as Chief Strategy Officer. I blinked David Montgomery, the same David I had worked with 5 years earlier at Stratix. The guy who'd pulled me onto a high-profile project that led to my first promotion. We hadn't talked in ages, but stayed loosely connected. Occasional LinkedIn likes, the odd birthday message, without much thought. I sent him a quick note. "Congrats, David! Hope Errant treats you well. Let me know if you want any insights. I was there recently." I hit send and went back to searching 20 minutes later. My phone rang. It was David. "Lisa! Hey, wow! Has it really been 4 years?" "Closer to 5, I laughed. "Feels like a lifetime." We talked for 20 minutes. I kept things light, but was honest. I told him I'd been at Errant recently, how the culture had changed, and how certain leaders, without naming names, had caused turnover and morale issues. He asked thoughtful questions. I shared a few ideas on how Errant could update their internal systems and eliminate overlap between the strategy and product teams. Toward the end of our call, David paused thoughtfully. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about hiring a chief of staff, someone to help me rebuild things from within. I wasn't quite sure where to start looking, but would you be open to coming back?" I sat there, stunned. Back to Errant? Exactly. You'd report directly to me. I'd make sure your title and pay truly reflect your experience. And just so it's clear, you'd be 2 levels above whoever made your life so difficult before I want you helping lead cultural change, not just surviving it. It felt like someone had suddenly opened a window in a room I hadn't realized was suffocating me. I asked for a day to think it over, though I already had my answer. By the next afternoon, an offer letter was waiting in my inbox. Director of Strategic Operations, reporting directly to the CSO, salary nearly twice what I had been making before full remote flexibility equity bonus opportunities I accepted without hesitation. The return onboarding happened quickly, and just 3 weeks after walking out of Errant Tech with a cardboard box and a detailed resignation letter, I walked back in. This time, through the front doors of the executive wing, David and I agreed to keep my return under wraps until the next company-wide strategy meeting, giving me time to settle in, review internal docs, and reconnect with old contacts still at the company. But word travels fast. The day of the announcement came. I stood near the back of the large conference room as David took the stage. "Before we dive into strategy updates," he said with a smile, "I'm excited to introduce someone who's going to help us rethink how we operate, lead, and grow." Heads turned, scanning the room. Lisa Grant is joining us as our new Director of Strategic Ops. Some of you might remember her. The silence was thick from the side. I caught Rachel's face shifting through confusion, disbelief, then something sharper. She recognized the name. Then she saw me. Her expression fell. She blinked once, twice, and quickly looked away. I stood tall, calm, and composed. I smiled. What she didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that this wasn't just a return. It was the start of something far bigger, something she'd never see coming. The unraveling. Begins after David's announcement. The room was utterly silent. Rachel didn't clap, speak, or move. She just stared down at the floor a beat too long, her face carefully neutral. But I saw the flicker. Panic setting in as she realized the ground had shifted beneath her feet, and she had no clue how deep the change ran. I didn't approach her that day. Didn't need to. My presence alone was enough. I knew her well enough to understand that being blindsided like that publicly would eat away at her far more than any confrontation could. The next few days were surprisingly smooth. David brought me into senior leadership meetings. I dug into org charts, process flows, and internal communications. Every file confirmed what I already suspected. Errant Tech had been bleeding talent for months. Morale was rock bottom. Turnover was through the roof. Rachel's name surfaced repeatedly in exit interviews, often hidden behind corporate jargon like leadership misalignment, lack of psychological safety, or unclear direction with a punitive edge. In plain terms, she was toxic, and everyone knew it. Yet no one had acted. Not yet. I hadn't come back for revenge. Not exactly. I returned to reclaim my name, my dignity, and my career. But if consequences followed, I wasn't going to stand in the way. It didn't take long for Rachel to try reasserting herself 3 days after the all-hands meeting. She sent David a lengthy email. I only knew about it because he called me into his office and angled his screen so I could read. I'm concerned about Lisa's presence here. She used to work under me, and there were problems. She tried to undermine my authority and left on difficult terms. I'm not sure she's fit for a director-level role. Just wanted to raise this privately. David raised an eyebrow when I finished reading. I'm guessing that's not the whole story? I kept my tone steady. Not even close. Thought so. He pulled a folder from his drawer. Inside was a printed copy of my resignation letter from 3 months prior. The one I'd CC'd to HR, leadership, and Rachel's own director attached were pages of documented harassment with dates, timestamps, and direct quotes. She forgot we keep digital records, he said flatly. I shook my head. She didn't forget, she just didn't think it mattered. Well, he said, it does. I left his office feeling oddly calm, not triumphant, not smug, just settled, a kind of validation I hadn't expected. But Rachel wasn't finished. She escalated that Friday. She sent another email, this time to David and the chief people officer. I believe Lisa is abusing her position to target me. I've heard from others she's speaking negatively about me. I'm requesting an investigation into her behavior. It was ridiculous. I barely spoke to anyone outside my team. David didn't respond. Instead, he forwarded the email to me with a single line. No need to reply. HR knows the full context. I thought that would be the end of it, but Rachel couldn't stop herself, the breaking point. The following week, during a senior leadership roundtable, she took a subtle jab. We were discussing a cross-functional delay in the product pipeline, caused by poor collaboration between her team and ours. I explained the issue tactfully, but clearly Rachel cut me off mid-sentence. Maybe you're just not used to managing this level of complexity, Lisa. It's a completely different game than typical administrative work. The room instantly fell silent. Right there, in front of 4 vice presidents, she implied I wasn't qualified to be part of the discussion, and she did it with a smile on her face. I didn't flinch. Instead, I leaned forward, locked eyes with her, and said, "You're right. Rachel managing complexity means fostering collaboration. That's exactly why I've spent the past week interviewing your former team members. None of them felt safe to speak freely under your leadership. I'd be glad to share those anonymized insights with you." Her smile faded away immediately. David jumped in. That would be very useful, Lisa. Please put those findings together in a report and send it my way, Rachel. We'll arrange a follow-up meeting to decide on next steps. Rachel stayed silent. Her body stiffened, and her hands clasped so tightly it was almost like she was trying to hold herself together. The meeting continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. She'd aimed to tear me down, but all she'd done was reveal her own failures as a leader. Later that afternoon, David called me back to his office. "I want to ask you something," he said quietly. "Off the record. Do you think Rachel is still a good fit for this company? I hesitated, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to choose my words carefully. She was given plenty of chances to change, but she chose not to. What happens next is up to leadership. But if you're asking whether she poses a cultural risk, the answer is yes. David nodded slowly. That's exactly what I thought. He said no more, but the look in his eyes said everything I needed to know. Rachel's days here were numbered, and she hadn't realized it yet, the final act. For a whole week after the round table, Rachel didn't say a word to me. No emails, no passive-aggressive jabs, just silence. But silence from someone like Rachel isn't peace. It's tension building behind a locked door. You don't know when it'll blow up, but you know it's coming. I focused on my work. The strategy alignment project David assigned turned into a massive cross-department initiative. I met with leads from engineering, data, marketing, and operations everywhere I went. The story was the same. We've been too scared to say anything until now, but people started opening up about being shut down in meetings, passed over for promotions, getting late-night calls, hearing demeaning remarks, struggling with mental health, and quietly quitting. Almost every story led back to Rachel. One afternoon, I met for coffee with Jenna, one of Rachel's former analysts who quit shortly after I did. We hadn't talked since I left the company. She looked surprised to see me in the executive wing. "Wait, you're back?" she asked. "Director of Strategic Operations," I replied, doing my best to keep a modest smile. Her eyebrows shot up. "Good, you deserve it." She paused, then leaned in. "You do know she told people you got fired, right? After you left." I blinked. "She said you weren't cut out for the role, that she had to clean house." I didn't believe her, but she said it more than once. I exhaled slowly. "Thanks for telling me." "She's not well, Lisa. You know that, right?" "I do." That conversation confirmed what I'd already begun. I started documenting everything, not for revenge, but to hold people accountable. Every complaint, every story, every time Rachel meddled in someone's work, undermined their authority, or quietly retaliated when she felt threatened, I logged it. David quietly encouraged me. He never said, "Build a case," but that was clear, without words. The writing was on the wall. Then one morning, it happened. David forwarded me an email with the subject, "Concerns regarding Lisa Grant." From Rachel again. This time, she went all out. The email was 4 paragraphs long, accusing me of sabotage, claiming I was abusing my position to poison people's opinions of her, obsessed with destroying her reputation, and trying to get her fired since my return. David's note at the top was short. "Thought you should see this. I've already passed it to HR." Below it, a message from the Chief People Officer. "Thanks, David. We've identified a pattern. 5 complaints in the last year, all very similar. We'll move forward with a formal investigation." 5 complaints. I leaned back in my chair, letting it sink in. It was happening. Still, I kept quiet. I showed up, ran meetings, delivered results. I refused to let her presence or the swirling rumors derail me, and that only sent her spiraling further. The day the company's quarterly newsletter was released, Rachel crossed a line she couldn't take back. Among the leadership updates, there was a brief profile. "Lisa Grant, our new Director of Strategic Operations, brings over a decade of cross-functional leadership experience to Errant Tech." A familiar face returning to the company, Lisa is known for her dedication to integrity, inclusivity, and operational excellence. I hadn't written it. I didn't even know it was coming, but it lit a fire under her. That afternoon, David sent me a message. "You need to see this." Attached was yet another email Rachel had sent, this time addressed to the CEO. "Lisa is manipulating internal communications. She doesn't deserve any leadership spotlight. She lacks a technical background and was previously pushed out of her role. I'm worried about the message this sends." The CEO didn't reply, but HR took action. 2 days later, Rachel was put on administrative leave. They didn't tell her why, but she knew, because the very next day, I found a sticky note on my office door, written in shaky handwriting. "I hope this was worth it." No signature, just pure spite, no apology. But I didn't need one. For the first time in over a year, I felt calm. A weight had been lifted. Rachel was gone. The investigation was underway in full force. I walked into that Friday's leadership sync knowing the storm had passed, and I was still standing, not just standing, leading. And for the first time, people were truly listening. The aftermath. Rachel was gone. Not officially, not quite yet. But her sudden placement on administrative leave caught more than a few people's attention. Rumors whispered quietly through the hallways. People speculated, but no one dared say her name aloud during meetings. It was as if she'd turned into a ghost overnight, haunting only the ruins she left behind. I wish I could say I didn't care, that I'd moved on, that I was beyond it all. But that wouldn't be true. Because when someone's cruel words have echoed rent-free in your mind for months, words calling you stupid, unqualified, ugly, disposable, it takes more than a suspension notice to banish them. Even now, I found myself flinching when my phone buzzed after hours, bracing for one of her impossible demands. But this time, it wasn't Rachel. It was David. "Got a minute for a quick chat this afternoon?" I met him in his office at 2 p.m. The blinds were halfway closed, casting long shadows across the room, and there was an unspoken heaviness hanging in the air. He gestured for me to sit down. "I wanted you to hear this from me first," he said, sliding a printed report across his desk. It was a formal summary from HR's investigation, dozens of employee interviews, written statements, logs of evidence, all centering on Rachel. "She's not coming back," he said quietly. "We've decided to terminate her contract effective immediately." I blinked, not because I was shocked, but because it finally felt real, undeniably real. David went on. "We found out she'd been secretly recording private team meetings without anyone's consent. She also deleted important project files out of spite after being pulled from key initiatives. But the worst part," he handed me another document, an email uncovered in her work archive. 2 internal messages. Subject: Director Profile. Request for revisions. "Please reconsider highlighting Lisa Grant in the upcoming newsletter. She's not respected by the team and has a history of insubordination. Elevating her could undermine leadership credibility." The email was dated a week before the newsletter went out. She had been actively trying to rewrite my reputation behind the scenes. David shook his head. "She underestimated how many people were finally ready to speak up. Her entire former team provided written statements. And your resignation letter? It's now a training example in HRR." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it all pressing down on me. She was gone. She couldn't reach me anymore. But the scars, those hadn't disappeared. Later that day, I found myself alone in the break room, staring into my coffee as if it might hold answers. Brian walked in, the manager who originally hired me, the one who'd quietly tried to protect me even when he had limited power. He smiled gently. "Heard the news," he said. I nodded. "You earned this, Lisa. The way you handled yourself, most people wouldn't have made it through." I looked at him and asked, "Do you ever wonder how she lasted so long?" Without hesitation, he replied, "Because people were scared, and because no one in power wanted to deal with the mess. Until you came along." I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I'd been scared too. Terrified. But over time, fear had transformed into something else. Determination. Maybe even courage. In the week that followed, the cleanup began. Projects Rachel had sabotaged were reassigned. Former employees reached out, thanking me for speaking out, for not letting her win. Some even asked if they could come back now that things were changing. And they were changing. There was a new lightness in the office, a sense of permission. Permission to ask questions, challenge ideas, and not tiptoe around fears. Still, one final surprise awaited me. On Monday morning, I opened my inbox to find an email forwarded by David. It was from Rachel. Subject: Exit process. Before my departure is finalized, I want to formally object. Lisa Grant manipulated the situation to push me out. She's unqualified and vindictive. I intend to pursue legal action. I read it twice, then laughed. Because what she didn't realize, what she never understood, was that power built on fear crumbles the moment people stop being afraid. I forwarded the email to legal with a simple note. Please see attached. Happy to provide any documentation you need. By the end of the day, legal replied, Thank you, Lisa. Given the volume of evidence and third-party statements, we are confident in our position. No further action required. No further action. Those words echoed in my mind, not just because the case was closed, but because for the first time in over a year, I could finally breathe without bracing for the next attack. Rachel's chapter at Errant was over. New beginnings. A month passed since Rachel's termination. Her name no longer surfaced in meetings. Her picture was removed from the internal org chart. Her office, the space people once entered with dread, had been quietly reassigned to a new hire. Someone kind, collaborative, human. The fear she wielded like a weapon was gone. But the change wasn't just in org charts or meetings. It was in the way people held themselves taller, spoke with more freedom, and dared to raise concerns without fearing retaliation. It was in how I started sleeping again. No more 10 p.m. texts, no stomach knots before Monday mornings, no second-guessing my worth. I had found my voice, and I wasn't giving it up. Weeks later, David called me into his office. He smiled as I sat down and handed me a sleek envelope. I opened it and read, Women in Leadership. Annual Summit, Panel Invitation. Topic: Resilience and Reinvention. Stories from the Front Lines. Featuring Lisa Grant, Director of Strategic Operations, Errant Tech. I looked up, stunned. You submitted my name? David nodded. Actually, one of your former colleagues did. HR shared your resignation letter as a case study. They were so impressed they reached out directly. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. Me, the woman who once sobbed alone in her car after Rachel called me a waste of a salary, now standing on stage, invited to speak about resilience. I said yes without hesitation. The day of the summit, I waited backstage wearing a crisp navy suit, my hands trembling ever so slightly, not from fear, but from a surge of energy and anticipation. Beyond the curtain sat a packed room of professionals, many likely battling the same struggles I had barely survived. I took a deep breath and stepped into the spotlight. The warmth of the lights on my skin was strangely comforting. The microphone felt natural in my hand. Good morning, I began. I want to share a story, not because it's extraordinary, but because it's all too common. The room fell silent. Every ear tuned in. I was once branded unqualified by a manager who feared I might outshine her. I was told to work weekends, cancel vacations, to shrink myself. I did the work. I stayed quiet until I couldn't anymore. I scanned the faces, hundreds of eyes locked on mine. I wrote a resignation letter, not as a way to burn bridges, but to leave a trail. I documented every insult, every unreasonable demand, every ounce of disrespect. A gentle murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. For a time, I thought that letter would close the chapter, but it didn't. A door opened, a chance to return, this time armed with power and a voice. When I faced the person who once humiliated me, I didn't retaliate. I did something far harder. I paused, letting the moment settle. I stayed composed. I let the truth speak for itself. I did the work. Again. And this time, people listened. The applause began softly and swelled. But I wasn't finished. I'm not here to tell you justice always arrives quickly. It rarely does. I spent nights eating toast for dinner because we couldn't afford more. I applied to dozens of jobs daily, hearing nothing back. I doubted myself more than I ever wanted to admit. I let those words hang in the air, but I'm also not here to tell you to stay silent, to wait for someone else to fix things, because your voice matters, even when it trembles, especially when it trembles. A genuine smile broke across my face. Today, I stand before you not as a winner, but as someone who refused to lose. When the panel ended, people approached me with tears in their eyes. One young woman whispered, "Thank you. I've been too scared to speak out, but now I think I can." That moment, that simple sentence, meant more than any title or accolade ever could. Full circle. Weeks later, Errant Tech rolled out a new company-wide policy on workplace culture, developed hand-in-hand with HR and me. It featured stronger reporting channels, anonymous feedback systems, and leadership accountability metrics. The company even launched a quarterly workshop called The Cost of Silence: How to Spot and Stop Toxic Leadership. They asked me to help design the first session. I did it, not out of revenge or to relive the past, but so no one else would have to endure what I did. 1 year after my return, I sat in my office, the real one, with glass walls and a sweeping skyline view, and reviewed a resume from a candidate hoping to join my team. At the bottom of her cover letter, she'd written, "I read about your story at last year's Leadership Summit. It changed how I stand up for myself. Thank you." I leaned back, eyes prickling. Rachel was a chapter in my life, but I was the author now. And my story? It was only just beginning.